The silence had weight that night. Yasmin had learned to measure silences as others measure time. This one was dense, heavy with rain that wouldn't fall and words that dared not exist. Her hands, accustomed to the warmth of Persian clay, trembled as they touched the cold glass of the Boston window, where raindrops traced paths she couldn't yet read. That's when she saw him, a man walking against the wind, his steps sure on the wet cobblestones, his silhouette framed against the golden lights of the street lamps. There was something in the way he moved, as if he carried the entire world on his shoulders but had learned to dance with the weight. Their eyes met through the glass, and Yasmin felt the air thicken with promises she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. In that blue gaze, she recognized something she thought she had lost forever. The possibility of someone seeing her not as the refugee, not as the victim, not as the sad story that needed saving, but as the woman who had chosen to survive and who, perhaps, was ready to choose to truly live. He stopped in the rain that finally began to fall, and a smile appeared on his lips that transformed the Boston night into something that tasted of hope and cinnamon, of whispered words in Farsi, and the promise that even the most broken hearts can learn to beat again. The desert wind carried sand and tears as Yasmin closed the door of the house where she had grown up for the last time. Her hands trembled as she touched the wood, worn by generations of her family, while the scent of saffron and cardamom escaped from the kitchen where her grandmother had woven stories with spices and whispers. It was a starless night in Shiraz, and the silence weighed more than the mountains surrounding her village. Yasmin was 20, with skin as fair as the desert moon and green eyes that held centuries of secrets. In her embroidered cloth bag, she carried only 3 things: her mother's necklace, a small Quran inherited from her great-grandmother, and a photograph where she smiled with a freedom she no longer remembered. "Your family's traditions are dangerous here," the man from the Humanitarian Foundation had told her days ago. "Your resistance to changing your customs has put you at risk." His words now echoed in the emptiness of the abandoned house, mingling with the memory of prayers that no one would ever say within those walls again. Yasmin walked through the cobblestone streets where she had run barefoot as a child, where she had learned to weave rugs with her grandmother's fingers, where she had danced forbidden dances under the moonlight. Every stone held a memory, every corner a fragment of her soul that she would have to leave behind. The car waiting for her was black and silent, like the night that enveloped her. The driver, an older man with scarred hands, looked at her with compassion in the rearview mirror. "Ready, miss?" he asked in a whisper that tried to be gentle. Yasmin nodded without words, because words had become strange in her throat. As the vehicle pulled away from her home, she pressed her palm against the cold window, watching the lights of her village become tiny dots, then nothing. During the journey to Tehran, she remembered her grandmother's last words before she left for the unknown. "My child, when the heart is left homeless, Allah puts you on the path of someone who has the power to give it back to you, but that gift is always wrapped in pain." Imam Khomeini. International Airport appeared before her like a border between 2 worlds. Yasmin had heard of airplanes, but she had never seen one up close. The vastness of those metal machines made her feel smaller than ever, like a raindrop lost in the ocean. In the waiting area, she held her ticket to Boston with hands that no longer felt like her own. The name on the document read, Yasmin Hashemi, political refugee. But she knew the words couldn't capture the complexity of who she really was. An uprooted woman, a carrier of ancient traditions, a guardian of a faith she had inherited along with the color of her eyes. The night flight wrapped her in a darkness that seemed eternal. As the plane soared through skies she did not know, Yasmin closed her eyes and felt she was leaving behind not only her country, but also a version of herself she would never reclaim. Somewhere between the clouds, between sleep and wakefulness, she heard an inner voice whisper words she didn't yet understand. "Your story doesn't end here, little one. It is just beginning." As the sun began to filter through the airplane window, Yasmin caught her first glimpse of the lights of Boston, a city that would receive her as a refugee, but did not yet know if it would accept her as what she truly was, a woman with roots so deep they could survive even the most painful transplant. As she deplaned, the American air filled her lungs with a cold she had never experienced. It was a different cold from the desert. Night, a cold that seeped into her bones and whispered stories of other exiles, of other lost souls who had walked these same corridors toward an uncertain future. At Boston Logan International Airport, an elegant woman in her 50s waited for her, with a sign bearing her name. She was Mrs. Vance, director of the Beacon Foundation, an organization dedicated to rescuing and relocating people facing cultural persecution. "Welcome to the United States, my dear," Mrs. Vance said in an English that sounded like music to Yasmin's ears, though she didn't understand every word. Her eyes, brown and deep, radiated a warmth the young woman hadn't felt in months. During the drive to downtown Boston, Yasmin watched from the car window as the streets that would soon become her new world passed by. The brick and brownstone facades, the cafes with sidewalk tables, the people walking briskly under a leaden sky. It was all so different from the adobe houses and spice-filled markets of her native Shiraz. The Beacon Foundation occupied a classic building in the Back Bay neighborhood near the Charles River. Mrs. Vance led her through corridors decorated with art from different cultures, photographs of people who, like Yasmin, had come there seeking a new beginning. "You'll work in maintenance and cleaning here," Mrs. Vance explained as she showed her the different floors of the building. "It's honest work, and it will allow you to learn English while you contribute to our mission." Her voice had a maternal tone that made Yasmin feel, for the first time in weeks, something akin to safety. Her room was small but clean, located on the top floor of the building. It had a window overlooking the Boston rooftops, where pigeons nested among the century-old shingles. Yasmin placed her bag on the narrow bed and approached the window. From there, she could see the city skyline silhouetted against the grey sky, a symbol of everything she didn't know about this new world. That first night, in Boston, as the rain gently tapped against her window pane, Yasmin unfolded her small prayer rug, facing east toward Mecca, but also toward the home she had left behind. Her prayers mingled with the sound of the rain and the distant hum of Boston traffic, creating a symphony that spoke of nostalgia and hope in equal parts. Before sleeping, she took out the photograph where she smiled with freedom and placed it on the nightstand. In the picture, her green eyes shone with a joy that now seemed to belong to another person, another life. "Someday I will smile like that again," she promised herself in a whisper that was lost in the shadows of her new room. She thought this was the worst night of her life, but she couldn't imagine what was yet to come. Have you ever felt like your world was falling apart to build a new one? Like if this story touched your heart, comment which city you're reading from, and subscribe for the next part. The first rays of the Boston dawn filtered through Yasmin's window, waking her with a gentleness that contrasted with the calls to prayer of her homeland. She had slept little in fragmented dreams, where her grandmother's voice mixed with the constant hum of a city that never completely slept. She dressed in the simple clothes Mrs. Vance had provided, dark pants, a white blouse, and an apron that identified her as part of the cleaning staff. Looking at herself in the small mirror in her room, Yasmin felt she was dressing in invisibility, becoming a shadow who would move through the halls without being truly seen. The Beacon Foundation woke up early. By 6 in the morning, its corridors were already echoing with the murmur of conversations in multiple languages, the sound of heels on the polished marble, the buzz of coffee machines that would fuel the long days of those working for humanitarian causes around the world. Yasmin began her routine with the meticulousness inherited from her mother. Every surface she cleaned received the same care she had once dedicated to the carpets she wove at home. There was something meditative in the repetitive motion of her hands, in the silent transformation of the spaces she touched. For the first few weeks, she moved through the building like a benevolent ghost. She cleaned the offices before their occupants arrived, polished the windows until they reflected the Boston light without a smudge, and organized the papers others left scattered on their desks. In this silent work, she found a different form of prayer, a way to connect with the sacred through service. Mrs. Vance watched her discreetly, noticing how Yasmin treated every object with respect, how her gestures had a natural elegance that no instruction could teach. "There's something special about this young woman," she commented to her assistant one morning. "She doesn't just clean, she transforms the spaces." One rainy Tuesday in October, as Yasmin polished the windows on the executive floor, she overheard a conversation that would change the quiet course of her days. Two men were talking in the adjacent office, their deep voices filtering through the glass walls. "Mr. Darvish is arriving tomorrow for the board meeting," one of them said in English, a language Yasmin had partially learned during her studies in Iran. "It will be his first visit in 3 years. "Amir Darvish," the second man murmured. "The man who founded this organization is never here to see it run. They say he can't stand to be near the stories he helps rescue." Yasmin stopped wiping the glass. That name, Amir Darvish, echoed in her memory like a distant sound. Her grandmother had once mentioned a man with that surname, someone who had left Iran years ago and had become a legend among exiles. That evening, in the solitude of her room, Yasmin asked Mrs. Vance about the foundation's benefactor. The director sat in the room's only chair, her eyes taking on a meditative expression. "Amir Darvish is a complex man," Mrs. Vance began, choosing her words carefully. "He left Iran very young, built a financial empire in New York, but never forgot where he came from. He founded this organization 10 years ago after a personal tragedy he never wanted to discuss with us." "A tragedy?" Yasmin asked, feeling an inexplicable chill. "He lost someone important. Someone he couldn't save in time." Mrs. Vance stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Since then, he has dedicated his fortune to rescuing others, but he himself remains unreachable, as if saving others is his form of penance." The next morning, Yasmin woke up earlier than usual. There was something in the building's air, a subtle electricity that announced the presence of someone important. Employees moved more quickly. Conversations were more whispered, and the hallways gleamed with a special shine. At 9 o'clock, as Yasmin cleaned the reception area, the main doors opened with a solemnity that silenced all conversations. A man entered with confident steps, followed by 2 assistants who looked more like bodyguards than secretaries. Amir Darvish was 30, but his blue eyes carried decades of experiences that no calendar could measure. His face, chiseled and marked by the sun of different countries, showed the complex beauty of someone who had known both privilege and pain. He wore a dark suit that spoke of New York tailors, but there was something in his posture that revealed humbler origins. Yasmin watched him from her position near the reception desk, her hands still on the cleaning cloth. There was something magnetic about this man's presence, something that made her hold her breath without knowing why. That's when it happened. Amir stopped in the middle of the lobby, as if he had felt the intensity of Yasmin's gaze. He turned slowly toward where she stood, and his blue eyes met the young woman's green ones. The moment stretched like honey spilled on marble. Neither of them moved, as if an invisible thread had connected them across the crowded space. In those eternal seconds, Yasmin felt that Amir didn't see her as the cleaning staff, but as who she really was. A woman with a history, with pain, with a dignity that no circumstance could take away. Amir's assistants called his name, breaking the spell. He blinked, as if waking from a dream, and continued toward the elevators. But before the doors closed, he glanced back at where Yasmin stood. She remained motionless for several minutes after he disappeared. Her heart was beating with an intensity she hadn't experienced since leaving Iran, as if something dormant inside her had awakened with the force of a silent earthquake. Over the following days, Amir remained in the building for board meetings. Yasmin would see him passing in the hallways, always surrounded by documents and important decisions. but every time their paths crossed, he managed to look at her, even if just for an instant. Those glances were anything but casual. They were intense, filled with questions that neither of them dared to ask. Yasmin began to feel she was carrying a secret too big for her chest, something that pulsed between her ribs every time she saw him. One afternoon, while cleaning the building's library, she found a book left on a table. It was a volume of Persian poetry, its pages marked with handwritten notes in Farsi. Recognizing the verses of Hafez, her favorite poet, Yasmin couldn't help but smile for the first time in weeks. "Do you know Hafez?" The deep voice made her turn with a start. Amir was at the library entrance, without his usual assistance, watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush. "Yes," Yasmin replied in Farsi without thinking. "My grandmother taught me his verses when I was little." The smile that lit up Amir's face completely transformed his features. For a moment, the businessman vanished, revealing the young man he had once been, the compatriot who recognized something familiar and lost in her. "It's been years since I've heard my mother tongue spoken with such affection," he admitted, approaching slowly. "What part of Iran are you from?" "Shiraz," Yasmin replied, and saying her city's name felt like uttering a prayer. "The city of poets," Amir murmured, and his voice held a note of nostalgia mixed with pain. "I'm from Tabriz, but Shiraz, I know Shiraz well." They stood in silence, surrounded by thousands of books that held stories of other times, other places, other people who had loved and lost. The air between them thickened with unsaid words, with questions that floated without finding answers. "How did you get here?" Amir finally asked. Yasmin told him her story, with the same simplicity with which she had learned to weave, each word placed with precision, each pause laden with meaning. She spoke of her grandmother, of the traditions she had defended, of the night she had to abandon everything she knew. As she spoke, she saw Amir's expression transform. His blue eyes filled with something that looked like recognition, as if Yasmin's story resonated with echoes of his own experience. "All of us who come here leave ghosts behind," he said when she finished. "The question is whether we can ever make peace with them." It was then that Yasmin noticed Amir's hands were trembling slightly, as if holding this conversation was costing him more than he wanted to admit. "Have you made peace with yours?" she asked with a courage that surprised her. Amir looked at her for a long time before answering, as if weighing how much truth he could afford to share. "No," he finally admitted, "and I don't think I ever will." That night, Yasmin couldn't sleep. Amir's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the memory of his eyes when he admitted his inability to forgive himself. There was something about this man that called to her, something broken that she recognized in herself. Over the next few days, their meetings in the library became a regular occurrence. Amir would arrive each afternoon, supposedly to review documents, but Yasmin knew he sought these conversations as much as she did. They talked about poetry, Persian music, the tastes of home they missed. But beneath these conversations flowed an undercurrent of attraction that neither dared to name. One rainy afternoon, as they shared verses from Rumi, Amir moved closer than usual. Yasmin could feel the warmth of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of rain coming through the open windows. "Yasmin," he said, and her name sounded different on his lips, like a whispered prayer. "There's something you need to know about me." But before he could continue, the library door opened abruptly. Mrs. Vance entered with a worried expression, followed by a man Yasmin had never seen before. "Mr. Darvish," Mrs. Vance said in a tense voice, "your former partner is here. He says it's urgent." The man accompanying Mrs. Vance was older than Amir, with grey hair and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. When he looked at Yasmin, his expression hardened in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Amir," the newcomer said in English, completely ignoring Yasmin's presence. "We need to talk. Now." Amir stood up slowly, and Yasmin noticed how his entire posture transformed, becoming rigid and defensive. "Yasmin," he said without looking at the other man. "We'll continue our conversation tomorrow." But as he left the library, Yasmin overheard the first words of the conversation fading down. "The hall. Do you know who that girl is? Do you know what family she comes from?" And just when she was starting to trust, the past returned without warning. Have you ever felt the perfect moment shatter into 1,000 pieces? Like, if this story is thrilling you, comment which city you're reading from and subscribe to find out what secret will unite or separate Yasmin and Amir. The silence that followed Amir's departure weighed on Yasmin like a lead blanket. She remained alone in the library, surrounded by books that suddenly seemed like mute witnesses to something she couldn't comprehend. The unknown man's words echoed in her mind. Do you know what family she comes from? For the next few days, Amir avoided the library. Yasmin continued her cleaning routine, but her eyes constantly searched for the familiar figure who no longer appeared. When she finally saw him crossing the lobby, he averted his gaze, as if looking at her was painful. Mrs. Vance noticed the change in the atmosphere. One morning, as Yasmin was organizing files in her office, the director closed the door and sat down across from her. "My dear," she began in her maternal voice, "I've noticed you've been different. Did something happen with Mr. Darvish?" Yasmin felt her cheeks burn. "I don't know what you mean." "I'm an old woman, Yasmin. I've seen enough hearts fall in love to recognize the symptoms." Mrs. Vance leaned forward. "But I've also seen enough pain to know when someone is running from something." "What do you know about him?" Yasmin asked, abandoning all pretense. Mrs. Vance sighed deeply. "Amir Darvish is a man haunted by decisions he made years ago. He founded this organization not just out of altruism, but out of guilt. There's a story in his past, something related to a family he couldn't help in time." "What kind of story?" "That, my dear, you will have to ask him." That afternoon, Yasmin made a decision that surprised herself. Instead of waiting for Amir to appear, she went to find him. She went up to the executive floor, where she knew he had a temporary office during his stay in Boston. She found him standing in front of a window overlooking the Charles River, his silhouette framed against the grey evening sky. There was something in his posture that spoke of a sorrow so deep it seemed to have become part of his bone structure. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning, as if he had sensed her presence. "Why are you avoiding me?" Yasmin asked with a directness that surprised her. Amir turned slowly. His blue eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Because I'm a dangerous man for you," he answered, in a voice so low she had to step closer to hear him. "Dangerous how?" Amir ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that revealed a vulnerability that contrasted with his usual composure. 8 years ago, I was an ambitious young man who had just made his first fortune in New York. I met an Iranian businessman who proposed an investment in my home country. He told me I could help modernize some industries, create jobs, do good while making money. He paused, as if the next words were too painful to speak. But that man had connections to the government. My money didn't go to creating jobs, but to funding persecutions. Entire families were displaced, their properties confiscated, their traditions declared subversive. Yasmin felt the air leave her lungs. One of those families, Amir continued, lived in Shiraz. They were known for defending their ancestral customs, for resisting the abandonment of their traditional practices. My money helped to have them persecuted, to force them into exile. The world stood still around Yasmin. The pieces of a terrible puzzle began to fit together in her mind. "What family?" she whispered, though in her heart she already knew the answer. "The Hashemis," Amir said in a broken voice, "a family of artisans, famous for their carpets and for keeping alive traditions that dated back centuries. They had a young daughter, about 12 years old at the time. I never knew what happened to her." Yasmin staggered as if she had been physically struck. Memories flooded her mind. The men who came to her house when she was 12, the threats to her family, the constant pressure that forced them to live in the shadows until they finally had to separate. "That was me," she said in a barely audible voice. "I was that girl." Amir looked at her as if he had seen a ghost. His face crumbled, becoming a map of horror and realization. "No," he murmured, backing away until he hit the window. "It can't be true. My family lost everything because of that persecution," Yasmin continued, surprised by the calmness of her own voice. "My father had to abandon his workshop. My mother fell ill with grief. My brothers scattered across the country. I spent years in hiding, moving from house to house, until the threats became so serious I had to flee the country." Amir sank into a chair, his hands visibly trembling. "That's why I founded this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the office walls. "That's why I dedicated my life to rescuing others, because I couldn't rescue the Hashemis, because I didn't know my money had been the seed of their destruction. And now you've rescued me," Yasmin said with a bitter smile. "Is that irony or justice?" They sat in silence for long minutes, the weight of the revelation filling the space between them like water rising in a flooding room. "What do we do now?" Yasmin finally asked. Amir looked at her with eyes that seemed to have aged decades in minutes. "Now you understand why I'm dangerous for you. Why we can't. We can't what?" she asked, stepping closer despite the pain in her chest. "We can't love each other," he said in a broken voice, "because I am the reason you lost your family, your home, your innocence." Yasmin stood motionless, processing the words she had just heard. Amir had admitted what neither of them had dared to name. They were falling in love. "But you didn't know," she said after a moment. "You didn't know what was happening." "Ignorance doesn't absolve responsibility," Amir replied. "I should have investigated. I should have been more careful. My blind greed caused suffering for innocent people." "Your greed," Yasmin repeated. "But your guilt has also saved hundreds of people since then. You saved me. I can't save you from myself." Yasmin moved until she was standing in front of him, so close she could see the tears welling in his blue eyes. "And what if I decide to save you? How can you even consider it?" he asked in a desperate voice. "How can you look at me knowing what I did? Because the man who unknowingly destroyed my family is not the same man who dedicates his life to repairing that damage. Because the Amir of 8 years ago was different from the Amir who looks at me with genuine pain in his eyes." Amir stood up abruptly, moving away from her as if her closeness was a temptation too dangerous to bear. "You don't understand," he said, pacing the office like a caged animal. "I have lived with this guilt for 8 years. I have built my entire life around penance. If I accept your forgiveness, if I allow myself to love you, what do I have left?" "You have the chance to be happy," Yasmin answered, with a simplicity that cut through the air like a blade. "I don't deserve happiness. And me? Do I deserve to live my life falling in love with ghosts? Do I deserve to carry the pain of what others decided for me forever?" Her words hung in the air, charged with a truth that neither of them had fully considered. "I have to go," Amir said suddenly, heading for the door. "I have to get out of Boston, away from you, before this gets any more complicated." "Running away won't change what happened," Yasmin shouted after him. "It won't change how you feel." Amir stopped at the threshold without turning back. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it will keep me from hurting you more." That night, Yasmin didn't go to her room. Instead, she went up to the building's rooftop, where antennas and ventilation ducts created a labyrinth of shadows under the Boston sky. From there, she could see the city lights stretching to the horizon, each one representing a life, a story, a heart beating with its own joys and sorrows. She sat on the edge of the roof, her legs dangling over the void, and for the first time since arriving in Boston, she cried. They were not tears of sadness, but of release. For years, she had carried the weight of being a victim of circumstances she couldn't control. Now, faced with the opportunity to choose her own destiny, she realized the power had been in her hands all along. By dawn, she had made a decision. At 8 in the morning, she knocked on the door of Mrs. Vance's office. The director received her with a worried expression, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and the determination that shone within them. "I want to ask you for a favor," Yasmin said without preamble. "What is it?" "I want you to help me leave Boston." Mrs. Vance frowned. "Leave? To where?" "To Miami." The answer took the director by surprise. She leaned back in her chair, studying Yasmin's face. "May I ask why?" "Because there are too many ghosts here," Yasmin replied. "I need a place where I can truly start over, where I'm not defined by my past or by the decisions of others." "And you think Miami is that place?" "The Beacon Foundation has an exchange program with organizations in Miami, right? I saw the documents while I was cleaning." Mrs. Vance nodded slowly. "Yes, we have a partnership with a foundation that works with migrants and refugees. But Yasmin, running away from problems doesn't solve them." "I'm not running away," Yasmin said firmly. "I'm choosing." That afternoon, as she packed her few belongings, Yasmin heard a soft knock on her door. She expected to find Mrs. Vance, but when she opened it, she came face to face with Amir. He looked terrible, as if he hadn't slept or eaten in days. His suit, normally impeccable, was wrinkled, and there was something wild in his blue eyes. "Mrs. Vance told me you're leaving," he said without a greeting. "It's for the best." "For whom?" "For both of us." Amir entered the room uninvited, filling the small space with his agitated presence. "What if I don't want you to go? What if you have no choice but to accept it?" They looked at each other like two exhausted warriors, each waiting for the other to surrender first. "Yasmin," he said finally, his voice breaking, "I can't ask you to stay, but I also can't bear the thought of you leaving. Then come with me." The proposal slipped from her lips before her mind could stop it. Amir looked at her as if she had suggested they fly to the moon together. "What? Come with me to Miami," she repeated, surprised by her own boldness. "Leave it all behind. Your company, your responsibilities, your guilt. Let's go to a place where we can get to know each other without the weight of the past." "I can't," he said immediately. "I have obligations, people who depend on me." "You're afraid," she corrected him, "afraid to find out who you could be if you let yourself be happy." Amir moved closer to her, so close that Yasmin could feel his breath on her cheek. "And what if I go with you and disappoint you? What if, without my guilt to guide me, I become the selfish man I once was? And what if you don't?" Their eyes met, and for a moment time stood still. Amir slowly raised his hand, as if to touch Yasmin's cheek, but stopped millimeters from her skin. "I can't," he murmured. "Then I can," she replied. The next day, Yasmin boarded a flight to Miami. In her bag, she carried the same photograph where she smiled with freedom, her mother's necklace, and a letter she had written to Amir, but had decided not to deliver. As the plane took off, she watched Boston grow small beneath the clouds, and she felt she was leaving behind not just a city, but a version of herself that had learned to be defined by her wounds. In the seat by the window, she unfolded the letter she had written. "Amir, if you ever decide you deserve to be happy, if you ever get tired of wearing chains you've placed on yourself, come find me. I'll be somewhere under the Florida sun, learning to be truly free. And maybe, when you find me, we'll both have learned that love doesn't always come to complete our broken lives, but to teach us that we can be whole on our own." What he said before she left will change the course of the entire story. Have you ever had to choose between love and freedom? Like, if this story is touching your soul, comment which city you're reading from, and subscribe to find out if love can blossom under the Florida sun. Miami International Airport greeted Yasmin with a humid embrace and a riot of sound that reminded her she was, literally, breathing different air. The douse Spanish she heard all around her had a melody completely different from the clipped English of Boston, a musicality that seemed to dance between consonants and vowels. Her final destination was a new life, where the New Hope Initiative would welcome her as part of the exchange program. During the taxi ride, Yasmin watched the vibrant city pass by, a landscape of palm trees, Art Deco buildings, and a sky so vast and blue it felt like an overturned bowl. In Miami, the air smelled of salt water and flowers she didn't know, The foundation bustled with families hugging, vendors shouting prices in rapid musical Spanish, and an energy that completely contrasted with the reserved elegance of Boston. A young woman with a wide smile and bright eyes was waiting for her with a sign that read, "Yasmin Hashemi, welcome." She approached with quick steps, her arms already extended for a hug that Yasmin didn't expect. "Yasmin, I'm Sofia Garcia, coordinator for the New Hope Initiative. It's so great to finally meet you." Her hug was warm and genuine, without the formal reserve Yasmin had grown accustomed to. During the drive to the Foundation's headquarters, Sophia chatted happily about the city, pointing out colourful murals, bustling markets, and parks where people gathered just to be together. "Family is everything here," she explained, "not like in other places, where everyone lives in their own little box. Here, we get into each other's business, for better or for worse." The New Hope Initiative occupied a restored Spanish-style house in Little Havana. Its white stucco walls and courtyards filled with bougainvillea created an atmosphere that immediately made Yasmin feel as if she had arrived at the home of a distant but beloved aunt. "Your room is on the second floor," Sophia explained as they climbed stone stairs. "It has a view of the central garden, so you'll wake up to the sound of birds." The room was simple but full of life. Sky-blue walls, hand-carved wooden furniture, and vibrant textiles that added pops of colour. Through the window, she could see a garden where lime trees, bougainvillea, and plants Yasmin couldn't name filled the air with sweet, spicy fragrances. "Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to Mr. Castillo," Sophia said. "He's our spiritual coordinator. He says every soul that comes here is looking for something they lost, and he helps them find it." That first night in Miami, Yasmin sat on her small balcony and watched the starry sky stretch over the city. The stars looked different from here, brighter and closer, as if they were whispering secrets in a language she didn't yet understand, but that her heart was beginning to recognize. The next morning, she woke to the sound of distant salsa music mixing with the birdsong Sophia had promised. Breakfast was served in the central courtyard, where other Foundation residents shared cafecitos and pastelitos while planning their day. Mr. Mateo Castillo appeared during breakfast as if he had materialized from the garden's shadows. He was a man in his 60s, with white hair and eyes that seemed to have seen every possible form of human pain without losing their ability to smile. "So, you are the girl who has come from so far away to find her heart," he said by way of greeting, sitting across from her without ceremony. "I didn't know I was looking for my heart," Yasmin replied, surprised by the man's directness. "Those who run never know what they are looking for until they find it. Those who come towards something new are always escaping something old." Mr. Castillo poured coffee into her cup without asking if she wanted any. "What are you running from, child?" "The past." "And what are you coming toward?" Yasmin considered the question as she watched the man's hands, weathered by years of work and marked by small scars that spoke of a life fully lived. "I don't know yet." "Good answer. Those who think they know everything learn nothing." In the following weeks, Yasmin immersed herself in the routine of the New Hope Initiative. Her job was to help other refugees and migrants adapt to their new life in Miami, teaching them everything from basic English to how to navigate the local healthcare system. There was something profoundly healing in helping others going through experiences similar to her own. A Venezuelan woman who had lost her family taught her how to make arepas while telling her stories of her homeland. A Honduran man who had walked thousands of miles showed her how to play basic chords on a guitar someone had donated to the foundation. "Shared pain becomes smaller," Sophia told her one afternoon as they sorted clothing donations, "and shared joy becomes bigger. That's why we operate like a family here." It was true. Within weeks, Yasmin found herself laughing more than she had in years. The local humour was different from Persian or Bostonian. It was more physical, more exaggerated, more inclusive. They made her feel part of inside. jokes, invited her to spontaneous celebrations, and hugged her for no particular reason other than the fact that she was there. One afternoon, while teaching a group of Haitian refugees to write in English, Yasmin realized she had gone hours without thinking about Amir. The realization surprised her so much that she paused mid-explanation of irregular verbs. "Teacher, you okay?" asked one of her students, a young man who had arrived with his feet torn up after the long journey from his hometown. "Yes," she replied, smiling in a way that surprised her with its authenticity. "I'm better than okay." That night, in her room, she wrote in the journal she had started since her arrival in Miami, "Today, I realize that I've spent so much time defining my life by what I lost that I forgot to ask myself what I could gain. In Iran, I was the weaver's granddaughter, the guardian of traditions. In Boston, I was the refugee, the victim, the one in love with a ghost. Here, in Miami, I'm starting to be just Yasmin." One Saturday morning, Mr. Castillo woke her earlier than usual. "Dress comfortably," he said. "We're going on a trip." He drove her in his old pickup truck through the vibrant streets of Miami to Little Havana, a neighborhood that seemed to pulse with a rhythm from another time. "Calle Ocho," Mr. Castillo announced. "Here live the families who best preserve the traditions of their homeland." They walked down streets where the air was thick with the smell of strong coffee and sweet tobacco, where murals of Cuban heroes adorned the walls. In the center of the neighborhood was Domino Park, where elders gathered to talk and play under the shade of banyan trees. "Why did you bring me here?" Yasmin asked. "Because you need to see that preserving traditions is not just a Persian thing," Mr. Castillo replied. "Here, too, there are families who have resisted decades of change, who have kept alive customs they brought from an island they can no longer see." He took her to the shop of a family that practiced the art of traditional cigar rolling. The patriarch of the family, a man with hands creased by tobacco leaves and bright eyes, welcomed Yasmin as if she were a daughter returning after a long journey. "This girl has artisan's hands," he said after watching how Yasmin touched the tobacco leaves with natural reverence. "You can tell she knows the value of work done with love." For the entire afternoon, Yasmin watched the family work, their hands moving with a practiced grace that was mesmerizing. There was something meditative in the process, something that reminded her of the hours she had spent with her grandmother weaving rugs. "You see," Mr. Castillo said as he watched Yasmin, "hands that know one tradition can learn any other. The respect for ancestral work is universal." At the end of the day, the cigar roller gave Yasmin a small, unadorned cedar box. "So you don't forget that you can grow roots in any land that treats you with affection," he told her. On the way back through the city, as the sun set over the skyline, painting the sky in impossible colors, Yasmin felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, a sense of unconditional belonging. "Mr. Castillo," she said, as the foundation's lights appeared in the distance, "do you think it's possible to love someone and at the same time need to be far away from them?" The old man glanced at her, smiling as if he had been waiting for that question. "Of course, it's possible, child. Sometimes we love someone so much we have to step away so you can both grow. True love doesn't always mean being together. Sometimes it means wishing the best for the other, even if that doesn't include us. But what if that person decides to look for me? Then it will be because he has learned that he deserves to be happy, and you will have to decide if you have learned the same." That night, Yasmin stayed up late, looking at the small cedar box. In its smooth surface, she saw the reflections of her new city, her new life, her new version of herself. For the first time since leaving Iran, she felt whole. The next day, she received a call from Mrs. Vance. Her voice sounded both excited and worried. "Yasmin, dear, there's something you need to know." "What's wrong?" "Amir has sold everything. His company, his properties in New York, everything. He's liquidated his businesses and is donating a large part of his fortune in the millions of dollars to humanitarian organizations." Yasmin felt her heart race. "Why?" I don't know. I only know that before he left Boston, he said something about learning to live without chains. Left? Where did he go? There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mrs. Vance answered. No one knows, dear. He disappeared a week ago, but before he left he asked about you. Can you love the one who broke your soul? The answer is just a step away. Have you ever felt that destiny weaves invisible threads between two hearts? Like if this story has you in suspense, comment which city you're reading from and subscribe to find out if Amir will find his way to Miami. 3 weeks after Mrs. Vance's call, Yasmin had managed to convince herself that Amir was just a beautiful ghost from her Boston past. She had thrown herself into her work with the New Hope initiative, had started taking pottery classes that blended her Persian techniques with local styles, and had developed a routine that made her feel, for the first time in years, genuinely at peace. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sophia burst into the classroom where Yasmin was teaching English to a group of Cuban refugees. Her expression was a mix of surprise, confusion, and something that looked like benevolent suspicion. "Yasmin," she said breathlessly, "you need to come with me, now." "What's going on?" "There's a man in reception who says he knows you. A man who, well, he doesn't exactly look like a refugee." Yasmin's heart stopped for an instant before it began to beat with a force that made her dizzy. "What's his name?" "Amir something Darvish." Yasmin asked her students to continue with their exercise and followed Sophia through the foundation's corridors. With each step, she felt she was approaching not just a meeting, but a definition of who she had chosen to be in this new life. She saw him before he saw her. Amir was standing in the central courtyard, watching the bougainvillea climb the walls. He was dressed simply, jeans, a white cotton shirt, and shoes that had seen dusty roads. His hair was longer than in Boston, slightly messy from the wind, and there was something in his posture that spoke of a man who had walked long distances, both physical and emotional. When he turned and saw her, the smile that lit up his face was so pure that Yasmin felt all the defenses she had built melt away like ice under the Florida sun. "Hello, Yasmin." His voice sounded different, softer, as if he had learned to speak again during his absence. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised by the calmness of her own voice. "I came to find you." "Why?" Amir approached slowly, as if aware that she might run at any moment. "Because I learned that you were right, that running away changes nothing, that carrying guilt that isn't mine to bear doesn't honor anyone, and that—" He paused, searching for the right words. "And that I love you enough to risk being happy." Yasmin felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them back. "How did you find me?" "Mrs. Vance helped me. At first she refused, told me I had no right to pursue you after letting you go, but she finally agreed when I told her what I had done." "What had you done?" "I liquidated everything, my company, my properties, my investments. I donated most of the money, millions of dollars, to organizations like this one." He made a gesture that encompassed the courtyard where they stood. "I only kept enough to live simply, to be able to choose what to do with my life, based on what I feel, not what I owe." "And what do you feel?" "That I want to get to know the woman who taught me that forgiveness isn't granted, it's chosen, that I want to learn to be happy without guilt, that I want to build something new with you if you'll give me the chance." Yasmin watched him for long seconds, studying his face for traces of the tormented man she had known in Boston. The intensity was still there in his blue eyes, but there was something new, a peace that seemed born from difficult but correct decisions. "How do I know you won't run away again when things get tough?" she asked. "Because I have nothing left to run from, and because—" Amir stepped closer until he stood before her, slowly extending his hand to touch her cheek. "Because I discovered that I'd rather face any difficulty with you than live in safety without you." The touch of his hand on Yasmin's skin ignited something that had been dormant for months. But instead of letting herself be carried away by emotion, she took a step back. "It's not that simple, Amir. You can't just show up here after months and expect everything to be like it was in Boston." I don't want it to be like it was in Boston, he replied firmly. In Boston, we were defined by our past. Here, we can be defined by our present. Here? If you'll let me, I'd like to stay in Miami. Sophia told me they need help with microloan programs for refugees who want to start small businesses. I have experience with that. You've already spoken with Sophia? Amir smiled with a mix of shyness and guilt. I arrived 3 days ago. I've been observing. I wanted to understand who you had become here before I introduced myself. Spying on me? Admiring you? Watching you teach those refugees? Watching you laugh with Sophia? Watching you work with your hands in that pottery class? Yasmin, you glow here in a way I never saw in Boston. Because here, I've learned to be truly free. And does that freedom include the possibility of loving without fear? The question hung between them like a bridge that neither knew if it was safe to cross. I need time, Yasmin said finally. I have all the time in the world. Over the next few days, Amir integrated into the routine of the New Hope initiative with a naturalness that surprised everyone, especially Yasmin. He stayed at a guest house in the city, but spent his days at the foundation, working with refugees who wanted to establish small businesses. Yasmin watched him from a distance, noticing how his way of relating to people had changed. In Boston, he'd been polite but distant, as if maintaining an invisible barrier between himself and the world. Here, he rolled up his sleeves to help carry goods, sat on the floor to talk to the refugees' children, and shared simple meals without ceremony. Mr. Castillo, who had developed a strange friendship with Amir from the first day, told Yasmin one afternoon, "This man arrived here just as you did, running from himself, but I think he's getting tired of running." "How can you be so sure?" "Because yesterday I saw him crying in the garden while helping one of the Guatemalan refugees write a letter to his family. Men who are still running don't cry for the pain of others." A week after Amir's arrival, Sophia organized a celebration for the birthday of one of the Salvadoran refugees. The central courtyard filled with music, homemade food, and the spontaneous joy that characterized gatherings at the foundation. Yasmin found herself watching Amir as he danced with the grandmother of a Cuban family, his movements clumsy, but his smile genuine. There was something beautiful in seeing him try to follow the rhythm of a salsa, failing spectacularly, but laughing at himself without self-pity. "He looks different when he really smiles," Sophia commented, appearing beside Yasmin with 2 glasses of iced tea. "What do you think of him?" "I think he's a man who has walked a long way to get here. And I'm not just talking about the physical distance." Sophia watched Amir, who was now trying to learn guitar from a Honduran refugee. "But I also think you have to decide if you want to walk the rest of the way with him." That night, after the celebration ended and everyone had gone to bed, Yasmin stayed alone in the central courtyard. The string lights they had put up for the party were still on, creating colorful patterns on the bougainvillea. "Not sleepy?" Amir's voice startled her. He was at the entrance to the courtyard, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to approach. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Can I join you?" Yasmin nodded, and he sat beside her on the stone bench under the lime tree. "It was a beautiful night," Amir said. "That's how nights are here, full of life, of warmth, like you." Yasmin glanced at him. "I wasn't like this in Boston. In Boston, we were both prisoners of who we thought we had to be. You felt like a victim, I felt guilty. Neither of us allowed ourselves to just be. And now?" Amir picked up a fallen bougainvillea flower and twirled it between his fingers. "Now I want to tell you something I never told you, something I discovered after you left." Yasmin felt the air thicken between them. "What?" "The man who proposed the investment that harmed your family. He wasn't just a business partner, he was my uncle." The words hit Yasmin like an invisible slap. "Your uncle?" "My father's older brother. When I arrived in New York, young and ambitious, he approached me. He told me he wanted to help me do something good for our country. I admired him, trusted him blindly." Amir dropped the flower and ran his hands through his hair. After you left Boston, I hired private investigators to find out exactly what had happened with my money. I discovered that my uncle had been using funds from several young investors like me to finance government operations against families they considered problematic. Families like mine. Families like yours. Families who refused to abandon their traditions, who kept alive customs the government considered subversive. Yasmin felt the world sway beneath her feet. Why didn't you tell me before? Because it meant admitting that I hadn't just been stupid, but that I had been used by someone from my own family, that the betrayal had come from within. What happened to him? I confronted him. I demanded he return the money, that he compensate the affected families. He refused. He said it was for the good of the country, that old traditions only caused trouble. Amir got up from the bench and started pacing in small circles as if he couldn't stand still. That's when I understood that liquidating my businesses wasn't enough. I had to find a way to directly compensate the families that had been harmed. How? I found other families like yours, families of artisans, of traditional merchants, of guardians of ancestral customs who had been persecuted. I offered them financial support, helped them relocate to rebuild their lives. Yasmin looked at him with new eyes. How many families? 17 so far, but the list keeps growing as my investigators find more cases. And that's why you came to Miami. Amir stopped in front of her, his blue eyes shining under the colored lights. I came to Miami because you are here, but also because here I can continue that work without the limitations I had in Boston. America has a tradition of welcoming refugees, of understanding that preserving cultures isn't clinging to the past, but enriching the future. Yasmin stood up slowly, processing all the information she had just received. Why didn't you tell me from the beginning? Because I was afraid you would think I came to you out of guilt, not love. I was afraid you would believe you were just another family on my compensation list. And am I not? Amir came closer, taking her hands in his. Yasmin, I found your story before I met you. When I read that, you had arrived at the Beacon Foundation. When I saw your photograph in the files, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope of redeeming myself, but hope of meeting someone who had survived what I had caused and had come out stronger. You looked for me, specifically. Yes, he admitted, but what I found was so much more than what I was looking for. I didn't find a victim to compensate. I found a woman who taught me that forgiveness is an act of strength, not weakness. Yasmin pulled her hands away, needing space to think. How do I know this isn't just another form of your guilt disguised as love? Because if it were guilt, I would have stayed in Boston paying penance. I came all this way because I discovered that I love you regardless of our history. I love you for who you are now, not for who you were then. The tears Yasmin had been holding back finally fell, but they were not tears of sadness. Amir, I know it's a lot to process. I know it changes things between us, but you needed to know the whole truth before you decided if you wanted to try and build something with me. Yasmin looked at him through her tears, seeing for the first time the whole man before her, his wounds, his efforts to heal, his imperfect but genuine love. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to teach me how to live without carrying the past on my shoulders. I want to learn to be happy with you. I want us to build something new, not on the ruins of what we lost, but on the foundation of what we've learned. And what if I can't? Then I will have learned that loving someone sometimes means accepting you can't be with them. But at least I will know I was honest with you and with myself. Yasmin approached him slowly, raising her hand to touch his cheek. Amir closed his eyes at her touch, as if that simple gesture was the answer to a prayer he had been whispering for months. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What are you afraid of? Of not being enough for you. That one day you'll realize you deserve more than I can give you. And what if it turns out we are enough for each other, just as we are? Amir opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made Yasmin's heart race. Is that a possibility? Instead of answering with words, Yasmin moved closer until she could feel his breath on her forehead. For the first time since they had met, there were no secrets between them, no unresolved guilt, no pasts to define them. "Yes," she whispered, "it's a possibility." When they kissed under the colored lights of the Miami courtyard, Yasmin felt all the broken pieces of her story finally find their place. Not because love had magically repaired them, but because she had learned that wholeness comes not from the absence of scars, but from the ability to love in spite of them. The secret will finally be revealed, and nothing will ever be the same. Have you ever discovered that true love doesn't come to complete you, but to accompany you as you complete yourself? Like if this revelation touched your heart, comment which city you're reading from and subscribe for the final chapter of this story. 6 months after that night under the bougainvillea, Yasmin woke to the sound of rain gently tapping against the windows of the house she now shared with Amir on the outskirts of Miami. It was a simple house, with stucco walls and high ceilings, surrounded by a garden where aromatic herbs grew alongside plants she had brought from her visits to local nurseries. Amir was no longer in bed. Yasmin smiled, knowing she would find him in the studio they had built together in the back of the house, where she had installed her potter's wheel, and he had set up a small desk from which he coordinated the microloan programs for refugees. Working in the same space had been a revelation for both of them. They had learned to move around each other without getting in the way, to share productive silences, to find common rhythms in their very different activities. Entering the studio, she found him exactly where she expected, bent over a series of documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. In recent months, his work had grown exponentially. He wasn't just helping refugees in Florida. He had established a support network that extended throughout Central America and the Caribbean. "Good morning," she murmured, leaning in to place a kiss on his cheek. "Good morning, love." Amir looked up, his blue eyes shining, with the kind of quiet joy Yasmin had come to associate with their mornings together. "Sleep well, like a baby. And you? You were up early. A message came in from Mr. Castillo. He wants us to come to the foundation this afternoon. Says he has a surprise." Yasmin smiled as she headed to her potter's wheel. Mr. Castillo had developed a habit of organizing surprises that usually involved new projects, new families needing help, or spontaneous celebrations of achievements no one else had noticed. "Any clues about what kind of surprise?" "None. He just told me to invite Sophia too and to bring a camera." Yasmin began to work the clay with her hands, feeling the cool, malleable material respond to her touch. In recent months, her work had evolved from just a form of meditation to a small source of income. The pieces she created, inspired by Persian motifs adapted with Floridian techniques, had become popular in the artisan shops of Miami. "Do you know what day it is today?" Amir asked after a while without looking up from his papers. "Thursday. What else?" Yasmin paused, her hands still on the clay. She mentally checked the calendar and realized she had lost track of a date that had once marked all her years. "It's the anniversary," she said finally, "of the day you left Iran." Yasmin nodded, surprised to realize the date had passed almost unnoticed. Years ago, that day had been a painful mark on her calendar, an annual reminder of all she had lost. This year, it had arrived without fanfare, without pain, almost without being noticed. "How do you feel?" Amir asked, coming over to sit on the floor beside her potter's wheel. "Strangely fine," she admitted. "Like that date belongs to another person, another life. Do you miss it? Your old life?" Yasmin considered the question as her hands returned to shaping the clay. "I miss my grandmother. I miss the smell of her kitchen, the sound of her voice when she taught me to weave. I miss the feeling of belonging to something that had existed for generations. But I don't miss the feeling of being trapped in expectations I didn't choose. I don't miss the constant fear, the feeling that every decision I made had to be approved by forces I couldn't control." Amir took a small piece of clay from her wheel and began to play with it between his fingers, a habit he had developed during their morning talks. Do you think your grandmother would be proud of who you've become? The question made Yasmin stop her work completely. She closed her eyes, summoning the memory of the woman who had been her greatest influence during her early years. I think at first she would be confused, she said finally. She would see my hands working with American clay instead of Persian wool, and wonder if I'd forgotten where I came from. And then she would see that I'm still weaving stories, only now I weave them with clay instead of thread. She would see that I still honor the tradition of manual labor, of respect for materials, of the patience required to create something beautiful. Yasmin opened her eyes and smiled, and I think she would see that I've finally learned to be free without ceasing to be who I am at my core. And what would she think of me? The question was loaded with a vulnerability that Amir rarely allowed to show. Yasmin stopped the wheel and turned to face him completely. At first, she would look at you with suspicion, she said honestly. She would see a man who is not from our culture, who doesn't share our traditions, who comes from a world of privilege she never knew. Amir nodded, preparing for the verdict. But then, Yasmin continued, she would see how you treat me. She would see that you listen when I talk about my traditions, not to tolerate them, but to understand them. She would see that you respect my need for silence as much as my need for conversation. She would see that you've learned to love without possessing, to support without controlling. Would that be enough to win her approval? That, and the fact that you make me laugh every day. Amir smiled, the kind of smile that completely transformed his face. I make you laugh? Constantly, especially when you try to cook Persian food and end up creating something that belongs to no known culture. Hey, my gourmet sabzi is improving. Honey, even the locals here, who can eat peppers that literally burn your tongue, have complained about your gourmet sabzi. They were still laughing when Sophia appeared at the studio door, watching them with that expression of maternal satisfaction she had perfected over the months of watching their relationship grow. Am I interrupting something important? Just a culinary debate, Yasmin replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Perfect. I'm here to kidnap you for lunch. Mr. Castillo insists we come early because his surprise requires the perfect evening light. Do you have any idea what it is? Amir asked. I have my suspicions, Sophia said with a mysterious smile. But I'm not going to ruin the surprise. An hour later, the three of them were heading toward the New Hope initiative in Sophia's old car, which had developed a personality of its own after years of service on the streets of Miami. During the drive, Yasmin looked out the window at the streets that had become familiar, the faces she now recognized, the smells and sounds that had stopped being strange and had become home. What are you thinking? About? Amir asked, taking her hand. That a year ago, if someone had told me I'd be living in Miami, in love with an Iranian-American man, working with refugees and making pottery, I would have told them they were crazy. Do you regret anything? Nothing, she answered without hesitation. Not even the pain we had to go through to get here. Why? Because the pain taught us to value this, she said, gesturing to the space between them, in a way we never could have if it had been easy. At the New Hope initiative, a scene awaited them that none of them had anticipated. The central courtyard had been decorated with photographs, but they weren't ordinary photos. They were portraits of all the people who had passed through the foundation in the last year. Refugees who had found jobs, families that had been reunited, young people who had learned new skills. In the center of the courtyard was a long table covered with a white cloth, upon which dozens of handwritten letters were spread out. Mr. Castillo appeared with his characteristic smile, followed by a group of people Yasmin recognized immediately. They were refugees who had passed through the foundation and now had stable lives in different parts of Florida. What is all this? Yasmin asked, her voice breaking with emotion. It's a celebration, Mr. Castillo announced. A celebration of what can be built when people decide to heal together instead of suffering alone. Sophia walked to the table and picked up one of the letters. Each of these letters is from someone whose life was changed by the work you two have done here. refugees who received microloans to start businesses, families who found community in Yasmin's workshops, young people who learned that their past does not define their future. Amir came closer to read over Sophia's shoulder. The letter was written in careful English, with a child's handwriting. Dear teacher Yasmin, thank you for teaching me that making things with your hands can heal your heart. My mum says that when you talk about your grandmother, she understands why it's important not to forget where we come from, but also why it's important to dream about where we're going. Who wrote this? Yasmin asked, tears in her eyes. Maria, Mr. Castillo replied. The little Guatemalan girl who arrived here not speaking a word of English and who is now starting first grade at a local school. One by one, they read the letters. Stories of people who had arrived broken and were now building new lives. Stories of families that had reunited. Stories of dreams that had seemed impossible and were now becoming reality. But this isn't just a celebration of what you've achieved, Mr. Castillo continued. It's also a request. A request? Amir asked. We want you to get married here, with us as your family. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the wind rustling the bougainvillea leaves. I'm sorry, Yasmin murmured. It's obvious you love each other, Sophia said with her characteristic directness. It's obvious you've found in each other not just a partner, but a home. Why not celebrate that officially? Yasmin and Amir looked at each other, communicating in that silent language they had developed over months of living together. We haven't talked about marriage, Amir said slowly. Why not? Mr. Castillo asked. Because... Yasmin started, then stopped, realizing she didn't have a real answer. Because I guess we were so busy learning to be happy in the present that we didn't think about formalizing the future. And what's wrong with formalizing something that's already real? A voice asked from the courtyard entrance. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Vance walking in with a smile that lit up her elegant face. Mrs. Vance, Yasmin exclaimed, rushing to hug her. What are you doing here? Did you think I would miss the wedding of my two favorite refugees? You were in on this too? My dear, I've been planning this trip for months. Mr. Castillo and I have been coordinating this surprise ever since Amir wrote to me, telling me how happy you were. Yasmin turned to Amir with an accusatory expression. You wrote to Mrs. Vance? I write to her every month, he admitted. I tell her how you are, how we are. She was the first person who believed we deserved to be happy together. And I was right, Mrs. Vance said, taking both their hands. Look at you. In Boston, you were two broken people trying to heal separately. Here, you are two whole people who have chosen to grow together. But marriage, Yasmin began to protest. Does it scare you? Amir asked. No, she answered, surprised by the honesty of her reply. It doesn't scare me at all. Then, Yasmin looked around the courtyard, at all the people who had become her chosen family, at the photographs documenting stories of hope, at the letters testifying to the possibility of rebuilding lives after loss. Then yes, she said in a clear voice, yes, I want to marry you. The celebration that followed was spontaneous and filled with the kind of joy that can't be planned. Someone brought a guitar, someone else appeared with food, and before they knew it, the courtyard had filled with music, dancing, and the kind of happiness that is built on a foundation of genuine community. As they danced slowly under the first stars, Amir whispered in Yasmin's ear, Do you know the difference between this love and what we felt in Boston? What? In Boston we fell in love with the possibility of healing. Here, we love each other because we are already whole. Yasmin pulled back slightly to look him in the eyes. And what if one day we're broken again? Then we'll learn to heal together again. Is that a promise? It's a promise. As they kissed under the Florida stars, surrounded by their chosen family, Yasmin felt she had finally found what she had unknowingly been searching for all those years of exile. Not a place on a map, but a place in the world. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of enough love to face any pain that might come. And for the first time since leaving Iran, she felt completely home. This story isn't just about them. It could also be about you. Have you ever found your home in a person instead of a place? Like if this story touched your heart, comment which city you're reading from and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of love to transform our lives.